Griffin, you getting fired is actually a blessing, she said in a voice as cold as a knife scraping against stone. It helps me optimize the alimony when we divorce. I already moved the kids' things out last week. With the hollow steps of a man returning empty-handed, I walked into a small diner. Maybe fate arranged it that way because that was where I met an old man. His thin, bony hands trembled as they touched the stained wooden table of the Peony Night diner. His cloudy eyes stared at me. There was a spark of shock in them, as if he had just seen a ghost step out of the past. I sat there numb, my jaw locked tight. I had not eaten anything for 16 hours, but hunger was not what was gnawing at me. What was tearing through my chest was the feeling of a man who had just been stripped of everything before the sun had even set. The old man reached for my hand and studied it for a moment. Then he pulled out a photograph and showed it to me, and he said something that might change everything. But before I tell you what he said, you need to know what happened to me earlier that day. Everything began at 10 o'clock that morning. A normal Monday morning until I was called into the office of Vance Kettering. Vance was 34 years old. He wore a tailored suit worth $4,000. It cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He did not even bother to look me in the eyes. He stared at the report on the flat screen. 16 years of dedication. 16 years of being the first man to open the warehouse doors at 5 every morning. 16 years of missing my kids' graduations to make sure the supply chain never missed a beat. Vance slid a sheet of paper toward me. He talked about optimization. He talked about younger staffing changes. He offered me 8 weeks of severance. 8 weeks in exchange for 16 years of my life. I walked out carrying a cardboard box. Inside it was everything left of my career. An old ceramic mug that said "World's Best Dad." A Rubik's Cube I bought for myself 3 years ago, but never had the patience to finish. I sat in my Honda Pilot in the parking lot for 40 minutes. Watching people walk in and out of the building I was no longer allowed to enter. My phone vibrated. It was Roxanne, my wife. I thought she would be the place where I could lean. I was wrong. When I got home, the house was silent in a terrifying way. No television. No laughter from Kipton or Jono. Roxanne stood in the living room. She was not surprised to see the box in my hands. It was as if she already knew. She had prepared for this moment. But what she had prepared was not encouragement, not comfort, not a plan to rebuild together. What she had prepared was something I never expected. "Griffin, you getting fired is actually a blessing," she said coldly. "It helps me optimize the alimony when we divorce. I moved the kids' things out last week." My heart stopped. "Because you are useless, Griffin. 16 years and you never became anything more than a warehouse manager." I stood frozen on the porch as the red tail lights of her car faded into the night, taking my entire world with her. No job, no family, no dignity. Only then did I realize something. Love, marriage, all of it was a luxury in my life. It only existed while I still had value. The moment my value dropped to zero, that love vanished without a trace. I wandered through the streets like a hollow shell, unable to understand how my life had collapsed like this. Things like that only happened in movies. But this was my reality. That was when I walked into that unfamiliar diner and met the old man. Maybe he was someone heaven arranged to compensate a man who had reached the end of the road. Maybe this was the beginning of the final act of the film where I played the main character. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a glass of water, maybe a few snacks. Sit back comfortably and remember this. The people in these stories always had every opportunity to do the right thing. They just chose not to. Leave a comment below and make sure you subscribe so you can hear the rest of this story. The Peony Night Diner at 10:47 in the evening. The air was thick with the smell of old grease and burnt coffee. I sat in the darkest corner. It felt as if I were freezing from the inside out. The world outside was still moving, but my world had shattered into sharp pieces. I had nothing left. No wife after 16 years of marriage. No children whom I loved more than my own life. Not even the title of warehouse manager that I once took pride in. I was just an empty space, a ghost sitting on a cracked leather booth. The bell above the door rang with a dry metallic sound. A cold draft slipped inside. An old man walked in. His name was Thaddeus Orley. He did not simply sit down. He stared at me as if I were a miracle, or a nightmare he had been waiting for 3 decades. His eyes were red. The wrinkles on his face were deep like cuts carved by time. He stared without blinking. His attention made me uncomfortable. It was too intense, too real compared with the betrayal I had just received from Roxanne. "You look exactly like my son," Thaddeus said. His voice was hoarse. It trembled, but it carried a terrifying weight. "But he disappeared 35 years ago." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I was about to stand up and leave. I did not have the strength to listen to someone else's tragedy. I already had more than enough of my own. I was a man abandoned by his wife, a useless man in the eyes of society. I did not want to become a replacement for someone else's painful memory. But before I tell you who Thaddeus Orley really is, and what happened to his son Rowan, I need to tell you what happened in the next 5 minutes. Because those 5 minutes became the hinge that changed my entire life. Thaddeus slowly reached into the pocket of his worn coat. He pulled out a photograph yellowed with age. The edges were soft from being touched thousands of times. He placed it on the table and gently pushed it toward me. I looked down. My heart skipped a beat. It was a photograph taken in the year 1990. In the picture, a young man was smiling. He wore a denim jacket. His hair was slightly messy. It was not me. But it was me. The young man in that photo was a perfect copy of me if I were 28 years younger. The same square jaw. The same small scar at the end of the left eyebrow. The same stubborn yet honest gaze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This resemblance was not coincidence. It felt like a cruel arrangement of fate. Thaddeus began telling the story of Rowan. Rowan disappeared one summer afternoon. He had gone out to buy milk and never came back. 35 years. Thaddeus had spent his entire fortune searching for his son. He traveled across the country. He hired dozens of private investigators. He had been deceived countless times. But when he saw me sitting here in this miserable diner, he believed that God had finally answered his prayers. I looked at the grief carved into his face. For the first time that day, I did not feel completely alone. My pain was betrayal. His pain was endless emptiness. Both of us were men left behind. I was no longer just a useless warehouse manager. In the eyes of this old man, I had become something sacred. I was the final hope of an aging father standing at the edge of his life, and suddenly my existence began to carry a meaning I had never imagined. Thaddeus looked at me. His eyes never left my face for even a second. He did not see a fired warehouse manager sitting in front of him. He looked at me the way someone looks at a treasure just pulled up from the bottom of the ocean. He slowly pushed Rowan's photograph aside. His thin fingers intertwined on the table. "Artificial intelligence can reconstruct my son's face," Thaddeus said quietly. "But it has no soul. It has no breath. It cannot walk into the places Rowan might have once walked." Then he looked straight into my eyes. "I want to hire you to become the face of this search," he said firmly. "I need you to travel with me. I need the living presence of your face to awaken memories people may have buried for decades. I will pay for everything. I will take care of your life. You will not need to worry about alimony or debts anymore." I froze. The offer was so absurd that I almost laughed. But when I looked into the storm of 35 years living inside that man's eyes, the laughter died in my throat. Something strange rose inside me. That morning I had been humiliated as a useless man. That morning my wife had thrown me away like an outdated piece of furniture. And now a complete stranger was ready to place his final hope in me. I suddenly realized a painful truth. Losing my job and my marriage was nothing compared with 35 years of searching without answers. I had only lost my world 12 hours ago. Thaddeus had lived with that emptiness for half his life. I looked down at my hands that had only known how to count inventory and stick labels on cardboard boxes. Now those same hands might help a father find his son. "I will do it," I said softly. It was the fastest and perhaps the most correct decision I had ever made. After all, I had nothing left in that city. Nothing left in the empty house Roxanne had already cleared out. I packed the few clothes that remained and left with Thaddeus that very night. We drove toward a small farm hidden deep in the countryside. There was only the sound of wind moving through endless fields of corn. No city noise, no judging looks from coworkers, no mocking words from my ex-wife. I stood in the middle of the cornfield at sunrise. Cold air rushed into my lungs. For the first time in 16 years, I felt something I had forgotten. Freedom. Out there, I was not a job title. I was not a number on Vance's payroll. I was Griffin, and I had a new purpose. Thaddeus showed me a small house at the edge of the farm. It was simple, but warm. He did not ask anything from me except my presence. The silence between us was not heavy. It was the quiet understanding of two souls that life had beaten down. Slowly I began to look into the mirror without seeing a failure. I began to understand that my value had never been the warehouse manager's chair. My value was that I could give hope to someone who had nearly lost it forever. We began to travel. The journey that Thaddeus and I took was nothing like a vacation. It was more like a pilgrimage through scattered fragments of hope. We moved from state to state. Every stop was based on an old lead or a report about a man with a similar appearance. I wore the same denim jacket Rowan had worn in the photograph from the year 1990. I stood in crowded public squares. I sat in roadside cafes. I let people look at my face, hoping that someone somewhere would suddenly freeze and call out the name of a man who had disappeared. Some trips ended in a frightening silence. We went to Minneapolis to meet a middle-aged mechanic. He had a scar on his eyebrow, just like mine. Thaddeus held his breath as we walked into the repair shop. But when the man turned around, Thaddeus's heart broke all over again. It was not Rowan. We traveled to Missouri to confirm a body that had been discovered deep in the woods. I stood beside Thaddeus in the cold room of the morgue. I could see his shoulders trembling. That night, in a cheap hotel room, Thaddeus cried. They were the choking sobs of a man completely exhausted. He confessed the deepest fear he carried inside his heart. He feared that the body might be his son. But he feared something else even more. He feared that the body might not be Rowan. Because if it was not, then the search would begin again from nothing. Not knowing is the cruelest kind of torture. It eats away at your soul every single day. It leaves you unable to live, yet unable to die. In those dark moments, something unexpected began to heal inside my own life. My children, Kipton and Juno, started visiting me at the farm on weekends. Roxanne could not stop it anymore because now I had the financial ability to fight legally. Juno began calling Thaddeus Uncle Thad. She would hold his thin hand and tell him about the lessons she learned at school. And for the first time I saw a small warmth appear in Thaddeus's eyes. He had lost a son, but he was slowly opening his heart to other children. I also began to understand the value of knowing the truth. I had once tried to avoid the truth about being betrayed and fired. I had wanted to disappear into darkness, but watching Thaddeus taught me something powerful. Facing the truth, no matter how painful it is still better than living inside uncertainty. I was no longer the insecure warehouse manager. I had become a companion to another man's pain. And somewhere along that road I began to cherish every moment I was still able to breathe, and still able to love. We still had not found Rowan, but in the middle of life's storm, Thaddeus and I had found each other. We arrived in Portland on an afternoon of relentless rain. Thaddeus had received a message from a volunteer about a man named Theo. The man had been living in a homeless shelter for 10 years. Before that, he had no memory of his past. Theo had lost his memory after a severe accident 23 years earlier. My heart pounded in my chest. This was the most promising lead we had ever received. We walked into a small room at the end of the shelter hallway. The man sat on a wooden bed. He looked up when he heard the door open. Time had worn down his face, but the structure of his cheekbones and the look in his eyes made me freeze. I stepped closer under the pale light of a fluorescent lamp. Theo looked at me. He went completely still. His lips trembled as if he were about to call someone's name. Thaddeus slowly knelt beside him and took Theo's hand. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. The silence stretched endlessly. Then Thaddeus gently let go. He exhaled softly. He looked at me and shook his head. Theo was not Rowan. Even though the resemblance was uncanny, Thaddeus knew the warmth of his own son. Once again, hope disappeared. Disappointment spread through my entire body. I looked at Theo. He looked painfully lost. A man without a past, without a family, without even a true name. But Thaddeus did not stand up and walk away. He looked into Theo's empty eyes and said something I will never forget. We can help him find his family. Rowan is not here, but this man is also someone's son. He said it with fierce determination. We stayed. Thaddeus used every connection and resource he had to spread Theo's photograph across social media. I continued standing beside him as the face of the search. I told the story of the man who had lost his memory. 6 days later, a phone call changed everything. Two women from a small town had driven 18 hours to Portland. The moment they stepped into the room, Theo jumped to his feet. One of the women broke into uncontrollable sobs. Theo was actually Caleb Fenwick. He had disappeared 27 years earlier after a tragic camping trip. His two sisters had searched for their younger brother in desperation for nearly 3 decades. They ran to him. They held him tightly. They called his name through their tears. I stood in the corner of the room as tears streamed down my face. I was watching a family being reunited. I was watching pain finally eased by a miracle we had accidentally created. Thaddeus stood beside me, smiling quietly. He had found a new purpose. His mission was no longer only about finding his own son. It was about helping bring other people's children home. In that moment, I realized my own true value. I no longer cared about the title of warehouse manager or Roxanne's contempt. I had found my meaning here. In the joyful tears of strangers, I had become a face of hope. And I understood something important. Sometimes life takes something away from you only to give you a greater mission. I was no longer a useless man. I was someone who helped reconnect broken lives. June 2026. I sat on the porch of Thaddeus's farm. The summer wind moved gently through the endless green cornfields. I watched Kipton and Juno running across the yard, laughing as they chased each other through the tall grass. Thaddeus sat beside me in his rocking chair. His hands no longer trembled like they had that first night in the Peony Diner. The Rowan Orley Foundation we created was now fully operational. In a short time, we had already helped solve 7 long missing person cases. Every family reunion healed another scar inside my heart. Sometimes I still think about the day I was fired. I remember Vance's cold face and Roxanne's cruel words. But those memories no longer hurt. They are just old pages from a chapter of my life that has already closed. I am no longer the warehouse manager trapped inside spreadsheets and inventory counts. I am the man who cooks dinner for a lonely old father. I am the father who shows up for every moment of his children growing up. And I have found peace in becoming part of something meaningful in other people's lives. The value of a life is not determined by the people who walk away from it. It is determined by the people who choose to stay. That is what I learned through this long journey with Thaddeus. Roxanne left because she only saw what I could earn. Thaddeus stayed because he saw who I truly was. He saw the kindness and loyalty I was willing to give to a purpose greater than myself. Sometimes you have to lose everything before you discover what truly belongs to you. Never believe someone when they tell you that you are useless. This world is vast and full of mysteries. Sometimes you are the answer to a question someone has been asking for 35 years. You are not a job title. You are not a number in a bank account. You are someone's hope. You might be the final missing piece of a picture that has been torn apart. So keep walking forward. Because miracles often appear at the moment you expect them the least. I looked over at Thaddeus smiling in the golden sunset. We were still searching for Rowan. But somewhere along the way we had found ourselves. I had found a father, and he had found a son. The real revenge I took against life was not hatred. It was choosing to live a brighter and more meaningful life than ever before. The darkness had passed. Now it was time for the light to guide those who were still lost out there. We stopped in a small town in Nebraska. Dust from the road covered the old Honda Pilot. Thaddeus looked more tired than usual, but his eyes still burned with that unbreakable faith. It had been a difficult week. We had just received DNA test results from a man in Ohio. The result was negative. Once again, hope had been extinguished. I watched Thaddeus gripping the steering wheel. His knuckles had turned white. I understood that feeling. It was the same hollow emptiness I felt the day I looked at Roxanne's divorce papers. But this trip was different. Kipton and Juno had been allowed to visit me for 3 days. They flew in and we picked them up at a small airport. When I saw them walking toward me, my chest tightened. I was afraid they would see me as a failure, a man wandering across the country chasing a ghost. But Juno ran straight toward me and wrapped her arms around me. She did not ask about my old job. She did not ask about the house we had lost. She simply said she missed the way I smelled. Juno started calling Thaddeus Uncle Thad. She was not afraid of his rough appearance at all. During dinners at roadside diners, Juno told him about her math tests. Kipton asked him questions about how to take care of cornfields. I sat there watching them, and I realized something remarkable. Thaddeus was smiling. A real smile. Not the kind people force onto their faces to hide pain. He was coming back to life through my children. And in a strange way, so was I. I used to believe I was worthless because I could no longer buy my kids expensive toys. I believed I was a failure because I had lost my social standing. But when I saw Juno holding Thaddeus's thin, weathered hand, I realized how wrong I had been. My value was never in what I owned. My value was in my presence. I had become a bridge between an aging man slowly fading away and two young souls full of life. And I was teaching my children something far more valuable than money. Persistence. Compassion. Those are treasures no boss can ever take away. Thaddeus looked at me through the steam rising from his cup of coffee. Sometimes finding someone isn't as important as who we become while searching, he said quietly. We still had not found Rowan, but along the way we had found something else. A new kind of family. Not one built by blood, but by understanding. The Griffin from 16 years ago died in Vance's office. The Griffin sitting here now was finally living a real life. A life where every breath had meaning. The night in Portland was cold and damp. Rain tapped steadily on the metal roof of the homeless shelter, creating a slow, mournful rhythm. I walked beside Thaddeus through the narrow hallways. The smell of disinfectant, mixed with the odor of damp walls, making the air feel thick and heavy. Thaddeus walked faster than usual. His old legs seemed to have been given some invisible strength. He did not say a word, but I could hear his breathing growing heavier with every step. We stopped in front of a wooden door with peeling paint. Inside was Theo, the man who had lived without memories for 23 years. When we entered, he was sitting by the window. Only the dim glow of a streetlight reached into the room. Theo turned his head. In that moment, the entire world seemed to stop. I saw my own face reflected in his. But it was a version worn down by time and pain. Theo's eyes widened when he looked at me. A chill ran down my spine. The resemblance was not only in the shape of the face. It was in the way he tilted his head. The way he pressed his lips together. Thaddeus stepped closer. His hands trembled violently. He reached out as if to touch Theo's face, but then slowly pulled his hand back. He was afraid. Afraid this might be another cruel mistake. Afraid that if this truly was Rowan, he would have to face the reality that his son had lived like a ghost for more than 2 decades. Theo said nothing. He simply looked at Thaddeus with deep confusion. He did not recognize the father who had searched for him for 35 years. I stood there watching the painful scene unfold. Suddenly I remembered Roxanne's face the day she called me useless. She had only seen a jobless warehouse manager. But Thaddeus saw an entire world inside a nameless man. To the rest of the world, Theo was just a homeless man with no past. To Thaddeus, he could be everything. That was when I realized something. The truth does not always bring joy. Sometimes the truth is a knife cutting open a wound that never had time to heal. We stayed with Theo the entire night. Thaddeus began telling small memories. About the denim jacket Rowan used to wear. About the tiny scar at the end of his eyebrow. Theo listened quietly, but his eyes remained empty. No spark of recognition appeared, and somehow that hurt even more than discovering a body. This was a disappearance happening right in front of us. Thaddeus began to cry. Tears rolled slowly down the deep lines of his face. He was not crying from disappointment. He was crying from love for someone he believed was his own blood. Something inside me stirred with sudden urgency. I wanted to help them. I could not watch another life break apart. I began taking photos of Theo and posting them online along with our story. I used my own face as proof that hope still existed. I was no longer afraid, no longer ashamed. I was fighting for a family that I did not even belong to. And in that moment I finally understood my purpose. I was not meant to manage warehouse inventory. I was meant to help gather the scattered fragments of people's faith. The door of the waiting room burst open. 2 women rushed in, breathing hard. They had driven through the night from a small town thousands of miles away from Portland. I stood beside Thaddeus. We held our breath. Theo sat quietly. He lifted his head. His eyes met the faces of the 2 strangers. Silence filled the room. Then a broken scream shattered it. Caleb. The older woman collapsed to her knees. She wrapped her arms around Theo's legs and cried like a child. Thaddeus stood frozen. Slowly he released Theo's hand. For a brief moment, disappointment crossed the old man's face. Theo was not Rowan. Later, the DNA test confirmed it. Theo was actually Caleb Fenwick. He had disappeared 27 years earlier during a tragic camping trip. A terrible accident had erased his memory. For nearly 3 decades, his family had lived in darkness. They believed he was dead, or worse, that he had been murdered. I looked at Thaddeus. I was afraid he would break, afraid this disappointment would be the final blow that destroyed him. But he did not collapse. Thaddeus smiled. Tears ran down his face, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of relief. "We did not find Rowan," he said softly to me, "but we brought Caleb home. Griffin, that means just as much." In that moment, I understood a powerful truth. Our search had never been meaningless. Mephes had not led us to Rowan, but it had become a beacon for other families. It awakened forgotten memories. It brought answers to 2 sisters who had waited 27 years to find their brother. Watching them hold each other, I felt warmth spread through my chest. The pain of losing my job and Roxanne's betrayal suddenly seemed so small. I had helped create a miracle. Thaddeus placed his hand on my shoulder. "My purpose is clear now," he said. "I will not only search for my son, I will use everything I have left to help find other people's children." He looked at me like a true partner. "You are not useless, Griffin. You are the one who opened this door." I stood there surrounded by the joyful tears of a family I had never met before. And for the first time in my life, I felt stronger than ever. I was no longer the abandoned man without a job. I had become someone who could bring life back to hopes that had long gone dark. June 2026. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the endless green cornfields surrounding Thaddeus's farm. I sat on the porch with a cup of hot coffee in my hands. Steam rose gently into the warm air. In the yard, Kipton and Juno ran through the grass, their laughter clear and bright, like the sound of small bells. Thaddeus sat beside me in his rocking chair. He no longer carried the trembling weakness I had seen that first night in the Peony Diner. The Rowan Orley Foundation was now officially operating. In just a few months, we had helped solve 7 long-standing missing person cases. Each family reunited felt like another scar inside my heart slowly healing. Sometimes I still think about the day I was fired. I remember Vance's cold expression and Roxanne's cruel words. But those memories no longer hurt. They are simply old pages from a chapter of my life that has already closed. I am no longer the warehouse manager, trapped inside numbers and inventory reports. I am the man who cooks dinner for a lonely old father. I am the father who shows up for every moment of his children growing up. And I have found peace in becoming part of something meaningful in other people's lives. The value of a life is not decided by the people who walk away from it. It is decided by the people who choose to stay. I learned that truth through my long journey with Thaddeus. Roxanne left because she only saw what I could earn. Thaddeus stayed because he saw who I truly was. He saw the kindness and loyalty I was willing to give to something greater than myself. Sometimes you have to lose everything before you can recognize what truly belongs to you. Never believe anyone who tells you that you are useless. This world is vast and filled with mysteries. Sometimes you are the answer to a question someone else has been asking for 35 years. You are not a job title. You are not a number in a bank account. You are someone's hope. You may be the final missing piece of a picture that has been torn apart. Keep moving forward because miracles often appear when you least expect them. If you have stayed with us until this moment, please help us with one small and quick thing: subscribe. Many people watch without doing it, but it costs you nothing, and it helps you discover the newest and best stories. I looked at Thaddeus smiling in the golden light of the sunset. We are still searching for Rowan. But along the way we found ourselves. I found a father, and he found a son. My true revenge against life was never hatred. It was choosing to live a brighter and more meaningful life than ever before. The darkness has passed. Now it is time for the light to guide those who are still lost out there.